Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Crown and today we are going to have some more stories that I hope that you will enjoy. But before we start, it would be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to the channel, like the video if you enjoyed it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now, without further ado, let's go! First story. Pranks I started as Pixabay back to my mom a long time ago. For those of you that are new to reading my stuff, I ask that you reserve judgment on why I did all of this till after you know the things my mom put me through. She blatantly favored my sister to the point of letting her get away with anything she did to me, unless my father got involved. Assaulted me as hard as she could to the point I couldn't even sit down for no reason on several occasions. Would snap her fingers and order me around like a dog. Let my sister steal money I earned from doing chores and odd jobs around the area and took her on shopping sprees with said money. Tried to send me to military school behind my father's back when I refused to let her beat me up anymore. And more recently tried to force me to give the house I inherited from my now deceased father to my pregnant sister. The story. To start off with, my mother has several irrational fears we never could explain. She hates and actively avoids things like guarding gnomes and clowns. But the gnomes especially for some reason. If she were a vampire, they would be a silver cross covered in garlic to her. And she's also pretty superstitious. And at this time Dad was staying in a motel because he outed Mom as a cheater, and then he filed for divorce. And my mother was not taking it well because he was also blackmailing her with a few forms of fraud she's committed in his name. So her mental health at the time made her shaken enough that it was easy to screw with her. My first choice of weapon was to find some garden gnomes. I had paid dirt at a nearby garage sale a couple streets over, run by an elderly couple. They were retiring to Florida and selling just about everything. The lady liked gnomes, and she had a whole bunch from big to small. I bought all of them super cheap. Hell, they were nearly free when I explained what I was going to do with them. My first act was to put the bigger gnomes in the yards of neighbors on either side and in front of our house. And yes, I did get their permission to put them there. They did still do hate my mother. She threatened multiple neighbors with HOA violations even though there hasn't been an HOA on the street since the early 90s. She even wanted to re-establish the HOA in 1999, but no one, not even my father, signed her petitions. So needless to say, I found it easy to find volunteers for my cause. She saw the gnomes in the morning when getting ready to leave for work, and I was watching from my bedroom window, and she looked noticeably uncomfortable as I'd aimed them to all stare right at her when standing by her car. The next place I targeted was my mom's work. I was acquainted with a co-worker of hers that absolutely despises my mother. Let's call this person Wendy. I talked to Wendy the previous day about my mom's gnome paranoia. Well, suddenly Wendy's desk and several others in the building were adorned with tiny gnomes that all were pointed to stare at my mom's workstation. Wendy even got a little gnome puppet to make jokes with in the office. Then over the next few days I went outside in the middle of the night and moved the gnomes in the neighbor's yard a bit closer each night. And I had a few with angry faces painted on them that I mixed in, and they were holding pitchforks. Eventually I placed several of them to look like they were rallying toward my mom's car. That made her start parking on the street to avoid looking at them. So I put one of the angry ones in the neighbor's backyard in such a way that its head was poking over the fence in view of the window in the master bedroom. I heard her freak out in the morning from seeing it, and then she knocked it down with a rake. Then for a different prank, I got two random guys from my high school to carry a large mirror outside of my mom's work like they were moving it. I got the mirror at a garage sale as well. And I paid the guys $10 each to intentionally bump into my mother in a way that would make her look like she was at fault the moment she exited the building. and one of them said, "Oh crap, lady, that's 7 years of bad luck." I watched from around the corner, and the color drained from her face. It was just priceless. I knew when she was coming out because Wendy called me on my cell the moment she was leaving the office, and I gave the two guys a signal to start moving. My mother ended up screaming at them and cussing them out, so they just booked it and we were gone in a flash. And I hopped on my bike and beat her home by cutting through a back road. Thank you, bicycle engine. Next, there was a little person in town that worked part-time as part of a clown group for children's parties. I called his number from an ad and asked if he would do something for me. Best $40 I'd spent in a long time. My mom just came home from work after the broken mirror incident, and as she was getting out of her car, there was a little man in a gnome costume riding a child's tricycle down the street and waving to her with a menacing grin. I tipped the guy an extra $5 for that performance. My mother ran into the house in a complete panic and actually called the police because there were gnomes out to get her. The police ended up doing a wellness check on her. Before long, my mother was complaining to the neighbors about the gnomes and threatening to call the HOA. But they all just reminded her there hadn't been an HOA in years, and there was no law against having the gnomes. Mom did not like that, and she went full Karen crazy. She took a claw hammer from Dad's tools and started destroying one of the gnomes with it, but the neighbor stopped her by threatening to call the police, and someone mentioned aloud that she shouldn't have hit the gnome because now they were really mad. That night, I took a whole bunch of the gnomes and set them up outside the front door to look like an angry mob, and in front of the back, I placed the gnome she'd attacked. Half its face was gone, and I had to super glue part of its head back together. But it looked mean. And then, for good measure, I added a few spiders that were some old Halloween decorations from old neighbor in with the gnomes. They looked realistic enough to be creepy at first glance. I also added a plastic Smurf I found just to be funny. The resulting morning freakout was glorious. Mom refused to leave the house and wanted to call the cops again. I talked her down and said it was probably just a cruel prank by the neighbors. Then I moved all the gnomes and spiders out of the yard so she'd leave and go to work. She's a terrible driver when she's in a bad mood, so she sped off the moment she left the driveway. And there was a cop just down at the end of the street that pulled her over and ticketed her for speeding in a residential area. Apparently, he got an anonymous tip the previous day about a reckless driver from a payphone to wait down at the end of that particular street in the early morning. I wonder who did that. I stopped moving the big gnomes around and just left them poised in the neighbor's yard until I moved out to live with my dad. And one of the neighbors I kept in contact with said the gnomes were all still there for years. In fact, it became a running gag in the neighborhood that keeping gnomes in your yard would keep my mother away. So a whole bunch of the neighbors got in on it and put them everywhere. Last I drove through the neighborhoods over 2 months ago, there were still a good few of them around. I even put a few gnomes in my front yard after my mother broke several of my windows, throwing rocks at my house. And the pranks did not end here either. I still had a few more in store, but that's for another time. Next story. Entitled Mother Tries to Steal My Stuff in Front of Base Police. I've encountered a few entitled parents before, but nothing like an entitled military spouse I keep hearing horror stories about. Well, I finally encountered one. I was in the middle of my lunch at the food court at the exchange. Think Walmart on a military base. On base after buying some stuff when some random kid approached me. He looked to be about 6 to 7 years old. "Hey, can I see your airsoft gun?" Pointing at the cheapo Crossman air rifle I had beside me. Huh? Yeah, sure. I set it on the table beside my tray. He looks at it for a few seconds and says, "Wow, can I have it?" "Oh, sorry, but no. This is mine." Then I put it away immediately, and he starts stomping around. "But I want it." "Sorry, but I said no. It is not a toy. Besides, I don't think you're old enough to own one. He left after ignoring him, wailing around for a minute or so. Shortly after, 2 Air Force Base police arrived at the food court to have lunch. They got food from Panda Express and sat at a table in the middle of the food court about 2 tables out in front of me. This'll be important later. Another few minutes passed and I finished my lunch. I got up to throw my trash away. As soon as I got back to my table to pick up my stuff and leave, it happened. A wild Karen approached with the entitled kid in tow behind her. She looked exactly how military wives were described in the story. Grossly overweight with her crotch goblin in tow and the "may I speak to your manager" hairstyle. I tell her, "Can I help you?" The entitled kid cried, "That's him!" Upon seeing the kid in tow behind the mother, I knew it wasn't going to be good. So I rolled my eyes and sighed on instinct. "My son wants your airsoft gun. Can you give it to him?" "As I told your son earlier, no, this is mine." "You're so selfish. You don't even need it." "And I paid for it. It's mine. If he really wants one, you can buy him one. They still have a few more inside." "No, I checked and they don't have any more of that. Give it to him now." "Nah, I'm not in the mood for this. I'm out of here." I tried to walk out the door towards the 2 Base police to get out of there, but the entitled mother got in front of me and tried to snatch the box my airsoft rifle was in. I instinctively yanked the box towards me and kicked her in the gut simultaneously, which sent her flying about 5 feet back. I maintained grip on the box, by the way. As soon as she hit the ground, she shrieked like a banshee. The entitled kid started crying even harder, and the 2 Base police who saw everything got up and ran towards us. One of them asks in a loud, booming voice, "What is going on here?" The entitled mother, still on the ground shrieking, "He assaulted me!" And I say that she tried to steal my airsoft rifle, and it was in self-defense. "Liar! You stole my son's airsoft rifle. I was just trying to get it back." The other Base police officer helps the mother up, but also keeps her back. "Sir, is this true?" "Of course not. She's lying, and I can prove it." The first police officer approached me as I pulled out the receipts out of the plastic bag that had the rest of my stuff down before setting them on an empty table. I then took out the debit card I used to pay for my stuff, as well as my military ID, and handed them all to the Base police. He looks at my receipt, sees my name on it, looks at both my debit card and military ID, and hands it back to me. I put the receipt back in the plastic bag, and my debit card and military ID back in my wallet. Then he says, "Yep, this receipt has a correct name on it. Thank you. I apologize for having to deal with this. Have a good rest of your day." "It's okay. You have a good rest of your day as well." Then the first Base police officer tells the other one to turn the entitled mother around, and once she was facing the other way, the officer takes out his cuffs to get ready to cuff her. Then he tells the other officer to start giving her verbal commands so they can cuff her. As soon as the entitled mother realizes she's being detained, she starts flailing around and screaming, "You cannot do this to me! My husband is a captain! I will have you both in trouble, you hear me?" And the officer responds with, "Ma'am, we saw everything that happened between you and this gentleman." Once they have her in cuffs, they take her and the entitled kid away to wherever they need to go. I left immediately after that, only to come back an hour later. Since the rifle case I bought for a separate rifle was a tad too small, and the airsoft rifle was not what I was expecting after doing a few test shots at home. Next story. My mom works at basically any shoe store. Basically every time when my mom and I go shopping for shoes, she gets mistaken for an employee. Most big chains do not have any uniforms that have to be worn, and employees instead wear one of those little name tags or IDs around their neck. What gets her mistaken for an employee seems to be that she's not a jerk. She actually puts the boxes back when the shoes do not fit her. So this other day, for example, we are shopping, and I'm trying on shoes, and as I want to return to my mom a couple aisles down the store, she's suddenly gone. Where could she be? Well, turns out that she's on the other side of the store, chatting to a nice guy as he's asking her about shoes. She, having worked in retail and knowing a bunch about shoes, helps him around. I follow the two for like 3 minutes while she helps him pick out shoes, then helps him to judge whether they fit. The guy doesn't find what he's looking for, but thanks her and tells her the service was amazing, and she goes, "Oh, I don't work here. I was just putting these boxes back where I got them from." The guy was so sorry, but then proceeded to tell her that even though she did not work there, she should. It was the best service he'd ever received. Mom then continues to give him tips as to where he can find good shoes that might fit him, pointing him to other stores. When I approach her and ask her, "What was that?" she just goes, "I was advising a customer." Duh. This happens frequently and we always get a good laugh out of it. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.